Supply and demand are three of the most famous and popular words in economics. Supply and demand, if you know them inside, outside, upside down, will describe almost everything we need to know in economics. It'll explain why marketing exists. It'll explain how assets are priced. It will explain how to sell your product, what price to sell at. It will explain many, many things. So supply and demand is a really important thing. In this video, what we will do is combine the supply curve video and the demand curve video and look at how when price changes, interactions lead to consumer or producer surplus, and also how changes in price ceilings or price floors lead to demand and supply inequalities. Alright, so what we'll do now is look at supply and demand. And the intersection of these two lead to the equilibrium price. We'll call it P star. And P star is the price that over the long run, in the long run, the price of the asset, the price of the whatever will sell for. There's also a resulting Q star, which is here, which is the total quantity that will be demanded or supplied, as they're in equilibrium, at that existing price. While this looks relatively straightforward, it is one of the most powerful and most widely used models in all of economics. And here's why. It explains, for instance, again we have this equilibrium price. Here, and I will draw a circle here, all of these people would have paid more for the item than they ended up needing to pay. They paid P star, they would have paid whatever this is up here, this much higher number. So all of this, and I will color this in here, all of this is called the consumer surplus. Similarly, down here, these producers would have produced at this price, but they would have sold at that price, but they ended up being able to sell way up here. So this area is the supplier surplus. This is where everything gets interesting. So now, for instance, let's suppose a new product comes to market, and here's the original demand curve, and after much advertising, etc., we have a new demand curve. So we'll have D1. So what happens? The original price, the price that we could have charged, is here. After the new higher demand, we have a price here. Now, what does that mean? If you think of it, let's go, and so this was the original supplier surplus. Afterwards, we have all of that original plus all of this up here. So this total region has increased. And the reason is because the suppliers have been able to charge a higher price because of effective advertising, etc., that shifted out the demand curve. Okay, so now let's imagine a world where the supply shifts, and we're going to look at a supply shift down from S0 or S original to S1. So maybe an input cost, maybe regulation put people out of business. Who knows? Who actually cares? What we're looking at is to see the impact of the lower supply. So the first impact that is pretty easy to see is that the price is going to go up. Here was the original market clearing price, so P0, and we had a quantity demanded and a quantity supplied of Q0. Afterwards, we had a new supply, a new lower supply, and we ended up with something that looks like this, Q1 and P1. So price went up, quantity demanded went from here to here. So quantity demanded went down, and what was supplied, obviously it's an equilibrium, so clearly the quantities dropped. Now what gets interesting is when we begin looking at what happens to consumer and producer surplus. So let's begin off and look at consumer surplus. Remember, consumer surplus is that what customers would pay for, but they didn't need to. So it's the area above the price and below the demand curve. So originally, here in this blue color, here was the original consumer surplus, this triangle. Everything above the original price and below the original demand curve. I guess there's only one demand curve. We never shifted demand in this case. All right. And we can also look at the original. Let's switch colors here, and I will go with yellow. The original supplier or producer surplus. That is the area above the supply line and below the actual price. So they would have produced here, wherever this is, and they would have sold at this point. They didn't need to. They sold at that point. So this is this area, and this, we've seen this before. I don't know what happened here. Okay, so this is that area. That's the original case. Okay, we've seen that. Now what happens in the new case when supply has shifted? So we'll go back and pick some different colors, and we'll get the easy one to look at is the is the consumer surplus. So again, it is the area above the price and below the demand line. So in this, it is significantly smaller. It is this area right here. Now, for suppliers or producers, if you will, they have an advantage because they were allowed to change their supply changed, and that led to a higher price. So while they're producing fewer, they're getting a higher price. So let's look at their area, and I'm going to pick a different color yet. I will pick what color? I guess I will pick green. And here again, it is the area from the supply curve to the price line. So the new supply is, let's see, right here. And it's not coloring. So it's above the supply line. They would have produced at this price. They ended up selling at this price. So it is this area. So as you can see, that has shrunk. The blue area, which is fairly big, let me just jump here, and we'll go to white to do all of them quickly. This blue area here changed to this little area here, and this area shifted to this area. So in this case, because supply declined, both the consumer and the producer surplus shrunk. Okay, now let's look at another condition that we sometimes need to examine. Here we have supply and demand, but for some reason, this existing price is deemed too high. So P0 is too high for whatever the reason, who knows. And then the government steps in and says, okay, we are going to lower the price. We are going to put a maximum price that you can charge. And let's obviously, if the price is too high, the maximum is going to be lower. So let me pick another color here. And let me go to red. And this is the new maximum price that the government is going to allow charged. So here we have P1. And now what we see instantly is that we have a shortage because consumers want to consume this much. They were originally consuming this much. Sorry, this was the original quantity consumed. And at the new lower price, they would like to produce or like to consume this much. So this is QP1. That's what they would like to consume. However, because suppliers don't want to consume, or suppliers don't want to supply that much, they are stuck here. So this is Q actual, and this is Q demanded P1, and this is Q actual P1. And what you see here is a shortage. This shortage exists because the price is not allowed to go up to what's called a market clearing price. A market clearing price is where supply equals demand. In this case, demand, QD-P1, is higher than supply, Q actual P1, and we have a shortage. Now, if you want to think of examples of this, you can think in anywhere where you have price controls. Very often, right now, as I'm writing this in 2016, we're seeing that happening in Venezuela, and there's a case I would like you to look at. We'll do it in a discussion, some articles on that. And you see the same thing in cities where you have price controls, price limits on rental properties. So there we go. Okay, we're going to do another one. Here's what's called a price floor. For example, a minimum wage law that says that you have to pay people X amount, whatever X is. So here we have the market clearing price. Oops, forgot to hit this. Here we have the market clearing price in the absence of any government intervention. However, they decided to impose a minimum wage law, and they set a new higher minimum wage, we'll say there. So here we go across, here's the minimum wage, and we have a supply that people want to work. People want to work more hours, they want more jobs, so this is Q desired. They would really like to work that much, but the supply just isn't there. That's the supply that people are willing to work. However, employers, businesses don't want to hire because at that price it's not valuable to them. So what happens is here is where the number of jobs, the number of hours actually are. So this is Q actual. And let's examine, like we did before, who wins and who loses here. So let's go to the original. Okay, we're using green. The original, in this case, we're going to look at supplier surplus. And supplier surplus is those people who are supplying jobs. That's the supply here. So the original is here. This is the original supplier surplus because that was the original price where supply and demand equaled, and this was the market clearing price, P original. And this area above the supply curve and below the price, that is the original supplier surplus. The supplier surplus afterwards will switch, and let me switch over here and go to a different color. We will go to whatever that color is, teal, I guess, and hopefully get it. Dismiss low battery, okay. And now we again have the area above the supply curve and below the price. And what we're looking at here is this area. So it's uncertain which of those two areas I've drawn them is bigger. What we do see, however, is generally speaking an increase in unemployment rates because people want to work, they come to the job market, and there's no jobs for them. Now, that's the basic Econ 101 introduction to this. There are people who have looked at this for their entire life. It's not quite so easy as this because there is a secondary effect as well. What happens in the secondary effect is that as you earn more money, you can spend more money, so therefore the demand for jobs actually goes up as well. It's not exactly clear-cut as we like to think, but most of the evidence suggests that when you have a price floor, especially when it looks at minimum wage, you will end up with a problem where the quantity desired is less than the actual quantity. In other words, in this case, unemployment rates will go up. So there we go. So those are just a few of the issues that when we're dealing with supply and demand. That said, supply and demand are used